all of these 15 speakers for the sessions that proceed have a challenging task of stuffing their beautiful, exciting work into exactly 2 minutes. And I'm going to be walking around here with my device of death here. This is the little hook, as I learned from my inspiration yesterday at Corby. Never underestimate the power of the hook. So they have exactly 2 minutes to stuff their presentation into, for you to decide where to go and and listen. So I come from the world of academia. My name is Julia Greer. I'm a professor at Caltech of all things that begin with an M. I'm in material science and mechanical and medical engineering. I'm also a mom and a musician, so it all has the M theme. Now, in the world of academia, we have these special conferences where maybe this concept at an event like this will highlight the importance of doing these aperitifs. So in the evenings, there's an open bar, and people can go and choose which poster to look at. So perhaps a better way to pose this question is, why should I come and drink my beer in front of your poster? That's the job of all the presenters. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Robert Zimmer, who will tell us about universities and free expression. Please welcome.
Good morning. I think it's no surprise to any of you that the issue about free expression on university campuses is a very important one. It goes to the core of the question of what is an education and what is it that can interfere with this education. University of Chicago, which I am the president, took a very strong position on this, reflecting its history about the absolute importance of free expression to a challenging and empowering education. These were encapsulated in something that's become known as the Chicago Principles, and this has been adopted by about 50 other universities around the country. However, there are many more universities that have not adopted this, have not made a statement to this effect, and in fact, where the environment of free expression is deeply challenged. So what we're going to be discussing this morning is this question of free expression, why it's important, what are the arguments that say why it's important, and why do people disagree with us, because there are plenty of people who disagree with this. And with that, I'm going to sit down and turn over 42 seconds to other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to freely express how you feel about Caltech stealing your provost to become our president? Wasn't sure if that was one of the topics. All right, thank you. Next up, we have Charles Mann, who will tell us about The Wizard and the Prophet. And in fact, I believe that the book is for sale out there.
20 years ago, my daughter was born. And if any of you are fathers, you know that there's this whole charade they go through to pretend that you have something to do with the birth. And they tell you to count and breathe, and they keep assuring you how important you are. And then they throw you out at the end. So the people who actually did something, the mother and the child, can get some rest. It's 3 o'clock in the morning inevitably, and I'm standing there sort of knocked out. And it suddenly occurs to me that when my daughter is my age, there's going to be almost 10 billion people in the world. And I knew this, of course. I think most of us knew this. But it really hit me. Maybe I had more skin in the game. And I thought, well, how's that going to work? How are we going to do this? And so then I'm a science journalist, and when I would talk to researchers and we would hit it off, I would say to them at the end of the conversation when we have coffee, you know, how are we going to feed everybody? How are we going to get water to everybody? How are we going to provide energy for everybody? And what are we going to do about climate change? And I was just, having conversations, and after a few years, I realized that the answers I got fell into two broad categories, which I ended up calling wizards and prophets. And basically the book is an attempt to describe how people think about the future. It's a book about the future that makes no predictions. And if you're curious, I'll be happy to tell you more about it in the session. Thank you. And I give my 46 seconds.
I think that everyone is so scared of the hook that they've really significantly reduced their presentation time. You can relax. I think a lot of that comes from sleep deprivation, by the way, a lot of the concepts that you mentioned from being a parent. All right, the next topic is very near and dear to my heart. In fact, I believe that I might even interject a few times, with my good friend and an amazing guy here, Joe DeSimone, will tell you about 3D printing and possibly about nanomaterials. Although I'm not sure how much you know about nanomaterials.
So thanks, Julia. The session ours titled 3D Printing and Nanomaterials is going to be chaired by Ken Washington, CTO at Ford, who we heard from yesterday in autonomous vehicles, this crazy prof from Caltech, and myself, I was on the faculty at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill since 1990, and now I'm leading a company in Silicon Valley. And so I'm sure everyone out here has heard about 3D printing. And I think people have a lot of different views about it. It may still be aspirational, and you may be really thrilled and in hopes of what it's going to mean for society and what it might mean for you. For those of you that may have seen it more close up, you may be disappointed because it really hasn't gone beyond anything beyond prototyping or just tchotchkes and simple things. But what we're here to tell you is that it's through breakthroughs in material science, breakthroughs in mathematics and cloud-based computing, and chemistry from the mechanics prof over here, whispering in my ear, that it's really here, and that 3D printing is actually moving into manufacturing. Julia is going to talk about nanomaterials, and she's been able to show properties that no one's ever seen before out of these really small structures, and it's really revolutionizing things, could have big impacts in energy storage and separations and all sorts of things. I'm going to tell you about more macroscopic things, including I'm wearing running shoes, big partnership with Adidas. This is going to be the largest 3D printing application in history, and it's here now, including using bio-based feedstocks. By 2 minutes up? All right. And then everything from dentures to all sorts of products. And so these are real life products that's going to impact everybody's lives. These can be 5 to 10 times cheaper than conventional dentures. And there's 60 million Americans that can't afford dentures. So the impact of being able to bring cost-effective products forward, we'll talk about this, could even talk about
shoes right here.
Running shoes. But there are a lot of interesting topics like supply chain, what it means for you, debates about guns, and all those things would be a fun topic to talk about. Thank you.
Watch your shoes. Thanks, Joe. Look at his amazingly cushioned, compliant shoes. All right, our next speaker is Rana Foroohar, who will tell us about the social media crisis. This is something that I think everyone's can relate to on every level. So with the crisis happening, I guess take over here. So let's hear about the crisis in 2 minutes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Julia. Thanks for coming. So I got interested in this. I'm a journalist. I write about economics and financial markets, but I got interested in this topic as a mother. Came home one day, opened up a credit card bill, found over $900 in charges in $1.99 increments, thought I had been hacked, then found out that my 11-year-old was addicted to FIFA Mobile, which is a soccer game. I'm sure any of you that have kids or grandchildren know about the addictive properties of social media and persuasive technologies. I think that these technologies and the platform firms that they come out of represent sort of 3 different crises, an economic crisis, a political crisis, and a cognitive crisis. And so we're going to explore these topics in this session. On the economic front, it's important to realize that now 80% of corporate value is living in 10% of IP and data-rich firms. Huge amount of political power there. We've seen the way elections can be manipulated through social media. We are at risk of that happening in the midterm, so I'd encourage you to come and hear my fellow panelists talk about this. On the cognitive side, our brains are literally being reshaped by these technologies in ways that we're only just beginning to understand. As I dig into this as a journalist, I'm hearing predictions that we may see early onset Alzheimer's in a generation because of the ways in which new technologies are rewiring our brains. So these are all the topics we're going to look at. I've got a couple of great panelists that I'm going to be speaking with. Cal Newport is a professor at Georgetown, and he's going to encourage you all to get off social media immediately, although he's also done so with a TED Talk that went viral, so a little bit of mixed messages there. We're going to tease that out with him. And Roger McNamee, who is a venture capitalist, seed investor in Google, Facebook, mentor to Mark Zuckerberg, has a new book out called Zucked that's upcoming in the next few months, and he's going to talk about why he has turned against social media. So I hope you'll join us.
Thank you. Well, if the $900 bill from your preteen, I guess, is not going to be the factor that inspires you to think about the meaning of life, then perhaps Sean Carroll could tell us a little bit about the meaning of life and the big picture, in fact, on life, meaning and universe, and put it all in a more global scheme.
I have 2 minutes. So think about how we think about each other as human beings. If someone asks you to describe a friend of yours to them, you might say, well, what they do for a living. You might talk about their physical appearance, their height and weight, and so forth. You might describe their hopes and dreams. We have a way of talking about human beings and what they are. We could also, though, mention that they are biological organisms. A human being is a collection of cells and tissues interacting in a certain way, sending biochemical signals back and forth, acting like biological organisms do. As a physicist, I can assure you that human beings are collections of atoms. We're made of elementary particles, of protons and neutrons and electrons obeying the laws of physics. So we have different ways of describing the same thing, of describing human beings. And none of these ways is wrong. They're all right at the same time. So the question becomes, how do we reconcile these different ways of talking about human beings as persons, as biological organisms, as collections of particles obeying the laws of physics? And what does that mean for how we think about ourselves as human beings? Come find out.
Thank you. I think everyone's really kind of terrified of the hook. I was instructed that if I don't use it at least twice, then I'm going to be dragged off stage. So you guys are being a little bit too good, following the instructions a little bit too well. All right. Our next speaker will be Joe Walston, who will tell us about the future of conservation. You ready?
So I'm not sure what I did wrong to be opposite Sean Carroll, but here we go. 200 years is the time that we've had conservation, us caring about nature. Only the last 100 years has there been any global conversation about what's happening to nature. And that 100 years has been defined almost entirely by one single feature, this brave, noble, and yet ultimately futile attempt to be able to slow the declines in nature. We've seen massive population growth, incredible rates of consumption and wealth creation, and that has led to ubiquitous declines in species, habitats, and the world as we know it. At best, the environmental movement has been about slowing those declines. Our victories have been about slowing the rate of the loss of the forest and the Amazon and the coral reefs, etc. So my world is a very bleak one, and the environmentalists are in a bit of a funk. Some will tell you that a disaster is just around the corner. Some will tell you it's only 100 years away. But almost everyone will not be able to give you some solutions. Some say technology will save us. Some say technology will just increase the speed of decline. I'm not here to tell you today about how one should feel, but I am going to be telling you about 3 enormous changes that are going on in the world that actually are bringing about for the first time the conditions that we would want for any sort of not just stopping of that decline, but an actual recovery of nature, a renaissance for nature. They're enormous trends. They're almost completely unknown to many of us, especially those in the environmental world, and they're the most exciting thing to happen in the environment in this planet, that actually for the first time can have not just a stemming of that decline, but a recovery and renaissance for nature. I hope you'll join us. Thank you.
Nobody's giving me a chance to exercise my hook powers. So yesterday we heard a bit on the future of the Republican Party. Seems like it's only natural that today we should hear about the future of some kind of a Democratic Party. And Jay Kriegel, please welcome and tell us all about it.
So I hope Ben and Donna are going to live up to the threat of having Julia play the piano for us sometime before we leave, hopefully with Winton. Yesterday, Michael Kramer and Brett Stevens, I think, did a brilliant job up here. And for the Democratic side, we're going to bring two sons of Louisiana. Former New Orleans Mayor Mitchell Landrieu, who is the heir to one of America's great political families, and New York Times columnist Charles Blow, who is just an extraordinary pundit. A would-be candidate who takes down monuments, and a journalist who paints beautiful word pictures. Now, maybe it's not so odd to focus on Louisiana, since 3 times in the last 40 years the state has voted Democratic, twice for Bill Clinton, once for Jimmy Carter, helping us 3 of the 5 times we elected a Democrat. But that does raise the fundamental question of what we have to do to win back swing voters to the party. But let's start with the more basic question, which is the future of the Democratic Party. And for that, I think we should decide there's no question the Democratic Party will be here. After all, third-party efforts, much as we may dream, have been dismal failures, from Ross Perot to John Anderson, and even the decision by Mike Bloomberg, many of our favorite would-be third-party candidate, that even if he were to spend $1 billion, which he would barely miss, he couldn't do it. So the Democratic Party is here to stay. So the question is not whether, but whom and what. And so we will look at questions today of, one, how serious is the threat from the left, the progressives, led by Bernie and the new giant killer, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of Queen. Oh, is it time?
I'm just kind of checking how many more things you got there.
Second, whether the party's lack of a coherent message and program, so whether the lack of a Newt Gingrich kind of contract with America is a problem for this year's election, whether the much reviled Nancy Pelosi is going to be a drag on the party, and lastly, whether the party's lack of a bench, strong historic bench for this year, is ominous. And Leslie Stahl, beware, we're going to do all that in less than 60 minutes.
Oh, wow, okay. I hope you're a better timekeeper than you did here. Thank you. Next up, we're at about halfway point, is Fiona Donovan, who will tell us about the Whitney women and their museum. You're welcome.
Thank you, Julia. Yesterday, we also heard all sorts of fascinating talks on topics such as global affairs, science and technology, and the arts. But I also noticed, and I noticed it again this morning, and want to give Donna and Ben credit for introducing a new and pretty important category to KentPresents this year, parents and children. Yesterday, Daniel Mendelsohn spoke memorably about teaching and traveling with his dad. Today, at 12:15 in the recital hall, I will be presenting with my mom. I believe this is a KentPresents first, so don't miss it. We will tell the story with many wonderful images of my mom's grandmother's founding of the Whitney Museum, and the legacy of 4 subsequent generations of Whitney women who have been actively involved in it since then. Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, was a sculptor who recognized that her fellow American artists working in the neighborhood around her Greenwich Village studio were not getting the attention that she felt they deserved. So she decided to do something about it and established the Whitney Museum in 1930. Today, in its smashing new Renzo Piano building in the meatpacking district of Manhattan, the museum is more vital than ever. Join us if you are interested in the following: a story of a significant and perhaps overlooked, here she comes, female artist and her legacy.
I just want to join the family.
Come along. Yeah, how one of our most important museums came to be, the ways nonprofit organizations, companies, or even families grow and change, how a private museum went public, but perhaps most entertainingly, how a mother and daughter navigate a KentPresents presentation. If my self-deprecating mother, my dear mother, had her way, you wouldn't get to listen to her at all. Fortunately, her stubborn daughter, moi, overruled that silly inclination. And if all goes well, you'll get to hear plenty of fascinating anecdotes from her and a contemporary perspective from me. So be with us for this inside look at an institution and the family of women who have guided it since its first days. Thank you.
All right. Don't make me bring out this thing. Yeah, all right. I think I've fulfilled my duties of having to bring this out twice, but we need to speed things up. So next up is Michael Kramer, although you don't look like Michael Kramer at all.
She doesn't.
No, I think this is Michael Kramer. Yeah.
It is.
You just, yeah, there you go.
And I
So-
just
no,
want to
you don't get to take this from me.
The best way to avoid the hook is to make sure you don't have it.
This is called overpowering
This is-
and abuse, and I'm gonna go.
It's abuse, more abuse, another example of abuse, yes. All right, this is an easy one, folks. The world's greatest living diplomat statesman speaks with one of the world's best journalists. So join us here in this room at Madison at 2:15 to hear Leslie Stahl guide Henry Kissinger on a tour of the planet's hotspots as he explains America's role in an increasingly multipolar world where the United States is no longer the lone superpower. And who knows, Leslie being Leslie, no one will be surprised if she pushes Henry to tell us how he really feels about Donald Trump. And as hopefully maybe he'll even compare him to the many presidents and other leaders he's served and advised over the years. You're not going to want to miss it. And just as an aside, I want to relate that last night at dinner, Konstantin, whom you'll hear shortly, the guy who killed Pluto and is searching for a new planet, had a slight discussion with Henry, in which Henry, of course, in his own way said, "Why is this important?" That's the panel you're going to want to hear. Here you go, dear.
I guess it's back.
Okay.
It's going to be hard to compete with that, except for one topic, which is guns in America. And Margot Hirsch is going to tell us about that, so that hopefully we can have an equally represented audience as in both.
Yes, we pulled the short straw on that one. Good morning. We are going to be talking about guns in America, an incredibly critical topic in this country because it's at epidemic levels, as we all know. But we're not going to be doing the pro-gun, anti-gun conversation. We're going to take a bit more unusual approach in that we're going to be talking about what can we do to address this issue from a practical standpoint. So we've got Charles Blow from the New York Times, who's written on this issue to help us in this conversation. We have Mike Weiser, who is also known as the gun guy. He's probably one of the few gun dealers in America that is really concerned about addressing gun violence, and he has a very unique and interesting perspective that he will share with us today. I'll be talking about how we can use technology to make guns safer. Guns aren't going away, so how can we prevent them from being misused using technology, creating gun safes, gun locks, and guns themselves that can only be fired by an authorized user. And our panel will be moderated by the one and only Joe Nocera, who doesn't need a huge introduction. So it promises to be a very interesting conversation. We're going to be firing all of our bullets to hit the target, so put us in your sights and come hear us at 2:15 upstairs, because we know it's going to be hard to abandon the Leslie and Henry discussion, but we do hope we'll see you up there. Thank you.
This is going to be a really hard one to choose from. So I'm imagining a lot of delocalized people going back and forth between the two of them. So our next presenter, I'd like you to go a little bit easy on Konstantin. He's not actually the one responsible for killing Pluto, and maybe he'll tell you about it. So save your guns and all that stuff for that. So Konstantin Batygin, also from Caltech, will tell you about how to find, or how he found Planet 9. So please.
All right, look. So over the last couple decades, our centuries-old quest to answer the question of whether we are alone in the galaxy has largely come to fruition. The first planet around other stars, another star, 51 Pegasi, was discovered in 1995, and since then, our tally of extrasolar planets has gone up by thousands. So today we know of something like 6,000 planets around other stars. Meanwhile, in the solar system, okay, we have been losing. Right? In 2006, we went from a legitimate 9-planet solar system down to 8 planets. Okay, and it's time to put a stop to this losing streak. Okay, and return the solar system to its former 9-planet glory. So join me today, and together we will make the solar system great again.
Yes, we can do that. All right, so for our next speaker will be Carter Foster, telling us about the infinitely shaded world of Jasper Johns.
Hi, everyone. Target with 4 faces, false start, fool's house, in memory of my feelings, according to what, scent, racing thoughts, ventriloquist, perilous night, dancers on a plane, corpse and mirror, green angel, mirror's edge, I call to the grave, regrets. That was a brief survey using the titles of paintings of the art of Jasper Johns. Johns picks apart language and image with a luscious but often restrained approach to materiality. He reminds me of another American artist with whom he is never compared, Edward Hopper, because in both their work, the substances with which they work, and I'm talking mostly about paint, becomes thickly infused with their own subjectivity. Their paint seems to vibrate with their thoughts. Of his pioneering predecessor, Marcel Duchamp, Johns once wrote that Duchamp, quote, moved his work into a field where language, thought, and vision act upon one another. That statement applies equally well to the person who wrote it. This afternoon, I'll be in discussion with art historian Fiona Donovan about Johns' work, particularly his late work, the subject of her recent book entitled Jasper Johns, Pictures Within Pictures, 1980 to 2015. Our hostess, Donna Rosen, asked us, among other things, to address Johns' titanic stature and importance, and I'm going to cheat and let the words of the great Italian Renaissance art historian Leo Steinberg do that for me. In describing Johns' early work, his famous Flags, Targets, and Numbers, he wrote, quote, the position of modern anti-illusionism finds here its logical resting place. The street and the sky, they can be only simulated on canvas, but a flag, a target, a 5, these can be made, and the completed painting will represent no more than what it actually is.
Give you more time.
One more sentence. For no likeness of an image or of an image of a 5 is possible, only the thing itself. Thank you very much. Come to hear us this afternoon to talk about Jasper Johns.
Well done. All right, and there's this Michael Kramer guy again, and I'm going to really hold on to my hook this time, who will tell us about the cyber war as I'm stepping away with my hook.
First of all, Konstantin, I apologize for accusing you of murdering Pluto. I don't understand that solar system stuff.
He can kill planets. He can take care of you.
Okay. So if you aren't worried about having your personal information hacked, if you aren't worried about our electoral system being hacked, if you aren't worried about our power grid and other critical infrastructure being hacked, then you're living in another world or at least another time. But none of that applies to you because you're here. And that's why you're going to want to be right here in Madison at 4 this afternoon to learn how actually scary all of this is and about whether there is anything meaningful to be done about it. With us then will be David Sanger and Jay Johnson. In the midst of a large portfolio of topics he covers for the Times, David is the single most informed journalist in the country when it comes to all things cyber. And his latest book, The Perfect Weapon, on sale outside this room, is a masterpiece. Truly a must-read, a one-stop shopping for all things cyber, and I really urge you to pick it up, and David will be around to sign it. And one other thing about that book, you might think it would be full of dense techno-speak, but it's actually amazingly readable. Also with us will be Jay Johnson, and during Barack Obama's second term, and for a few hours into Donald Trump's presidency because he was the designated survivor during the 2017 inauguration. Jay was, among other duties, the man responsible for defending against cyber attacks as the Secretary of Homeland Security. We're going to learn a lot from these two guys, so I urge you to come and be there. It'll be a lot of fun, too. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done. I don't know about you, but I'm really enjoying the diversity in the topics and the breadth in the topics and also in the length scale. So we're discussing things from nano to macro to planets, spanning 10 orders of magnitude. So our next presenter will tell us about cities, which is somewhere in between planets and nano. So Sarah Moser will tell us about the cities of the future.
Hi, so I'm one of the speakers in the Cities of the Future session, along with Dan Doctoroff, who's the CEO of Sidewalk Labs, and this is a company vying to build an experimental smart city project in downtown Toronto. Mitch Landrieu, everybody's favorite former mayor of New Orleans, will be moderating/refereeing this session. And because Mitch and Dan are not here yet, I get to spend a little bit more time introducing my own topic. So I'll be presenting on the global phenomenon of constructing new master plan cities from scratch. In the past 15 years, across Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, about 150 new urban utopias are emerging from jungles, from deserts, from farmland, and more recently from the ocean. The Global South is in the midst of a sort of new city fever. There's the assumption that new cities will make countries globally competitive, rich, future-proof, and will solve all their urban problems. So for example, Morocco is building 15 new cities, Nigeria is building 9, Indonesia 10, Saudi Arabia 5, Kuwait 12, and so on. I'll introduce China's ocean-based new city projects as a key geopolitical strategy to expand its de facto territory. I focus on Forest City, which is a new mega development for 700,000 Chinese nationals. This is being built on 4 artificial islands off the coast of Malaysia, at a choke point in one of the world's busiest shipping channels. So, while we all obsess over Trump's tweets and tantrums, China's building at an unprecedented scale and pace. So if your children and grandchildren are not taking Mandarin lessons at the moment, you may want to register for them at the end of my talk. So please come to the recital hall at 4, and you can get a glimpse into our urban future. Thank you.
Thank you. And to finish off the day, full of talks and exciting topics, we're going to have something unusual and something very different. We're going to have Itamar Kubovy, who is the founder of the Pilabolus dance, actually do a performance for us, from what I understand. So please welcome, tell us about it.
Good morning. For those who don't know Pilabolus, we are a 47-year-old dance and performance company that started at Dartmouth College and has gone on to perform in 65 countries for 5 million people over the last 47 years and in front of 1 billion people online and in broadcast. In spite of that, Pilabolus has always been a rural arts organization, a small rural arts organization, and has focused for its inspiration on nature. Over these years, there have been 2 major areas of nature that have been sort of emerged as our areas of investigation. The first is weight and what the body can do in terms of shifting and pouring weight and how that can create an illusion of weightlessness. And second, the play of light and shadow and how one can actually gain control over shadows as a form of storytelling. In order to explain this, we have a number of dancers and 2 of our classic short works in each of those different media. And we will perform them, talk about them, and actually give you a small sense, all in an hour, between 5 and 6, of how it is that the bodies really come together, get a behind-the-scenes peek at the magic of Pilabolus illusion. Look forward to seeing you there.
And I think with that, we need to thank Ben and Donna one more time for enabling us to participate in such an enriching and wonderful world. Thank you.